This almost feels like I'm recording my therapy sessions. I don't know how interesting this might be to anyone listening, but this is what it's been like for me. I had another brief dalliance with a kind of panic attack not that long ago, and I felt where it was occurring in my body, and it was happening basically in my abdomen. I could feel my muscles rippling like they were being stimulated by electrodes. And I remembered that there was an interview with David Goggins, the former Navy SEAL, who had a very abusive childhood, and he was in quite a defensive posture his whole adult life. And he told his yoga teacher about his problems, and the yoga teacher asked him if he'd ever heard of the psoas muscle, PSOAS, and he hadn't. And the teacher explained to him that that muscle joins the lower and the upper part of the body, and it can, once it's very tense or overactivated, it can generate an inordinate amount of stress, anxiety, so much so that it creates a kind of paranoid universe where you're living in a kind of hunted state, or you're kind of fearful most of the time. You're in fight or flight way more often than you need to. And he taught him how to release the muscle, and it was like a revelation for Goggins. And I tried the stretches, and I found way more than relaxation occurred. I almost felt like jigsaw puzzle pieces of my life slotted into place in a way that I hadn't set out to do when I sat down on the yoga mat to stretch. It was way more like an alignment, fundamentally.
Cool. In our last conversation, when I talked about working with the acro dance teacher for a period, and I was talking about my observations of how the practice was going pre and post COVID. It began 2020, and then it fizzled out in the summer of 2020. But I was saying that I couldn't further extend my body to do the macaco. I was stuck in a flexed state. This would be the exact same thing you're talking about.
I think so.
Yeah, it would be identical. But you have a chicken and egg thing then, don't you, when talking about musculature. I mean, there was something that had you first go into, let's say, a hypertonicity across the psoas, and then that stimulus then can just perpetuate or compound, and then maybe the external stimulus, whatever was startling, may have passed, but the tonicity remains.
Yeah.
Which it speaks loads to the shapes the body takes as a result of the outside world, whether it be an event in the form of physical insult or something maybe psycho-emotional, which probably segues nicely into the theme of our conversation today, because we've agreed to theme our conversations and condense them to something 30, 40 minutes long. And your suggestion for this one was the topic of despair.
And I despair at us covering this topic in under 30 minutes.
Well, yeah, something that came to my mind is that most likely we'll end up doing Despair, the sequel.
Back by popular demand.
It's interesting you say back by popular demand, because I had a bit of a revelation by just accepting your suggestion that we discuss despair. Because at first I wouldn't say I was hesitant, but I didn't jump at it and be like, excellent, this is exactly what our audience needs to listen to. But then when it was almost permission to discuss, I actually felt a sense of relief, which gave me some insight into myself. Because professionally, I have a bit of an obligation to be the silver lining guy.
Yeah.
And in my therapeutic practice, I have an obligation to intercept these cyclical, or again, to use the term, perpetuating thought patterns that are of a catastrophization or catastrophizing quality. And if I can do that with my clients who are in physical pain, if I can intercept these compounding catastrophization or these catastrophizing ideas, or this sense of helplessness with hope, this sense of bewilderment with wonderment, then I'll be doing them a service, as well as, of course, the manual work involved. So it's very rare, if ever, I get to dive into the topic of despair. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, when I was like, I wouldn't say I was planning, let's say, for this, but when I was looking ahead at our conversation, I gave my mind an opportunity to go open up to all the things all the reasons why I could feel despair. There are so many. And I thought to myself, I'd have absolutely no qualms whatsoever. In fact, I might slightly revel in taking the wheel of the vessel and just nosediving us deep to rock bottom, listing out all the things we could all be in an absolute crippling state of disparity over.
Well, it seems like our news organizations are fully committed to that project, right?
Well, right, and that's probably where I get so much of this information that could fuel that descent.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned about your role as the silver linings guy, which I think is a really, really apt way of putting a lot of roles out there in the world. They're set up as healers, helpers, teachers, and their job is to kind of toe the official line, which is some version of chin up, buddy, it's going to be okay,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is optimism, which is not the same thing as true hope. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting him. But my understanding that Nietzsche has of hope is that not that your problems will go away, but that they will become meaningful.
that's a really great way of putting it because I don't know who said it. It might have been Viktor Frankl who said
Mm.
it's something to the effect of man isn't looking for his problems to go away. He's looking for something significant enough to rise to.
Yeah, I think that's
It's
right.
something to that line. And I don't, it might not have been him, but I think there is great truth in there being power in, I suppose, shouldering the burden of life, but I think there's something more powerful and more significant in assisting our fellow human, our brothers, our sisters, each other, in shouldering each other's burdens.
Yeah. There is something very specific though about working with people who are in a state of psychophysical distress. And my brother's a therapist too, and he's told that therapists should go to therapy because no matter how healthy or well adjusted you may think you are, if you're around people who are somewhat despairing on a regular basis, you're absorbing some of that kind of toxicity. It's like an
Mm-hmm.
environmental hazard in your job, and you're absorbing it all the time. And you might think it's having no effect, but it is building up, and you need to kind of discharge it in some way. And I think that I don't know what it's like for you to do your job. I know that when I teach college students, they're generally a happy, healthy bunch, but there's so much anxiety under the surface and an abiding sense that this might all be meaningless. Like they don't know fully, really why they're doing what they're doing sometimes. It's just a sense that in the absence of knowing what they should be doing, they're going to pursue this career and hope that it's meaningful.
Mm-hmm. And then you feel like you are leaving home with more anxiety than you came to the classroom with
Um,
from them, as in like by osmosis, by exchange, their discharge becomes
I
your.
don't know. I don't want to put it on my students. I think for me personally, I think a lot of my anxiety is long. It's from long, long ago. It's from being a school kid and being in school and not knowing if what I'm doing there means anything, and not having many friends, and basically being kind of confirmed nearly every day that I might be just a mistake. Like I shouldn't be here. Like I shouldn't be in the school, and I shouldn't be maybe on the planet, and that nothing is protecting me because I'm just this frail, fragile, wibbly wobbly accident that's wandering around on the planet. And lately, I've been starting to realize that maybe that's the illusion. That's the crazy thing to believe, and the less ridiculous things to believe that there's something that is kind of creating me, and I should be.
Yeah, I mean, for you, it's kind of let me put my finger on this. The first notion you had for, let's call it the first half of your life, is a peculiar one for me to hear. I can't imagine too many people having that take on their existence But at the same time, I appreciate my naivety and how I've had to like deliberately shave that nonsense, the rose-tinted glasses I developed in my youth or whatever away. I really enjoy actually, again, like I said, looking into the desperateness of existence so as to not wander the roads with this naivety. But then your second half of life, or your rebirth view, is something I suppose that I would agree with you wholeheartedly on.
Well, I
And
just want to.
yeah,
Sorry. No, I don't
no,
mean
you
to.
go ahead.
I don't mean to suggest that I was this profound little schoolboy thinking about, profound ontological questions or anything like that. It would manifest. I wouldn't be thinking about it consciously, but it would manifest in there's a math test tomorrow and you didn't prepare because you're lazy. And now you're going to do badly on the test and you're going to suffer. And who knows what it means that if you do badly on the test, it just means you're stupid or you're not going to succeed in life. Like you're doomed, basically. You're kind of doomed. And all of these little things that are going wrong for you are just little premonitions of just how doomed you are. The doom is coming, you're going to suck, and it's just taken me so long to unlearn that. I don't think you can just will your way out of it. I think there needs to be this kind of leap from a paranoid model to a metanoia. This idea that Jung talks about, and it's sprinkled throughout a lot of theology. You can't you can't gradually talk yourself out or bootstrap your way out of the paranoid universe. You kind of have to teleport. You just have to leap from a world that's totally indifferent and doesn't care to one that's fundamentally ordered and beautiful.
And that leap is some type of paradigm shift that you
Yeah,
accept.
of the most profound kind. But I think some people seem to have a thoroughgoing, complete and profound, instantaneous teleportation, and other people, like myself, wibble and wobble back and forth between the models with no firm footing. Like looking back on it now, having got out of the paranoid model, I can't take it seriously. It's not compelling anymore, but I can't quite shake it off either. It's like some sort of bad town that you left. You're always getting kind of pulled back into it somewhere.
Yeah, some like residue, like it's like a snake shedding his skin, but there's still a few bits you need to scratch off against the tree.
Yeah.
A school, man, like I'm writing at the moment an essay that on, I have a theory, and I don't think it's groundbreaking, how traumatizing school has been. And what I'm playing with is the idea of physical education. But you're talking about how school not only didn't set you up for life ahead, but induced, possibly, it might have been the induction of your paranoia.
Yeah, I think so, in large part. And I'm reading at the moment C.S. Lewis's autobiography, Surprised by Joy, and I'm surprised by just how much of that book's devoted to his childhood and specifically to his schooling. And it sounds like he went to different kinds of hell, like a sample platter, with lots of other things going wrong as well. I mean, he lost his mother at a very young age. His father didn't really understand him. His brother ended up having to ship out to go to war, and he enlisted himself. But it was the boarding schools and the weird kind of evil structures they had of punishing people for not being snobby enough and all these other things. It's a
Wow.
fascinating read, but it's like it's more than an autobiography. It's like an autopsy on a misspent childhood in formal education.
That's so tragic. That's so tragic and so widespread. A
Mm.
misspent childhood. The amount of hours the kids, us included as kids, had spent in these situations that were nauseating.
Hunched over a desk, kind
A
of panicking
desk and
for the upcoming test. And,
yeah. Yeah, I remember when you mentioned the upcoming test, you brought back a memory of mine from third or fourth class, which means I was around 9 or 10.
mm,
And the teacher would get everyone to, I think the idea was everyone would stand up, a question would be asked of you, and if you got it wrong, you stay standing. If you got it
wow.
right, you sit down. Yeah. And I remember this happened before, and I remember it was coming up. It was something like after the break, we're going to do the the test thing or whatever it was. And I couldn't stomach it. And I, Unwell Cadigum Dulgadian Letters, can I go to the toilet? And went into the toilet and I was pacing. The big silver steel urinal is still clear in my mind. I was like, how do I get out of this one? Like, I cannot go back to that classroom. I have no idea what question he's going to ask me, if I will or won't know it. And it just became this monster that I just ended up sticking my fingers down my throat until I could produce some evidence in the urinal that I was sick enough to warrant a phone call to leave me out of school. And I did it.
Oh God. Oh God. Yeah, I've got 4 kids. You've got 2. We're thinking about education in part because parenting is one of the most important roles you can kind of sign up to. I don't have any answers, but I know that there's got to be, I really hope and pray that there is some movement towards understanding that children are complete beings that are trying to figure out not just who they are, but what they are in the world. And when you put them all in a box and you make them jump through hoops all at the same speed because you just assume that's the most efficient way to do it, and if anyone trips over the hoop that you're swinging at them, they start to infer all the worst kinds of things about themselves. I that the damage it's bordering on violence, you know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And do you know what? As you say it, there was an element of violence that actually saved me to a degree in schooling. Well, I don't know how much it did save me, but I think school was significantly traumatizing on reflection for many people. And when I was working as a physical educator and a physical therapist, I can trace a lot of my clients' disengagement from physicality in their body at large with PE, with physical education, coming up with reasons and notes, similar to me sticking my fingers down my throat to get out of it. These other different types of panic responses came about to get them out of it. And from then on, they would identify as not coordinated, not sporty, or whatever it is, just not physical. In most cases, I don't have a body. Like, I don't even want to think about it. It's just not. What do you mean? No, gone. I depart whatever from that.
And then you take that model, but then you get so browbeaten into being buff that you try, without having a body, to hammer whatever you do have into a certain idealized shape.
Precisely. Yeah, with no sense, as in literal sense, like a sense of the feeling body, a sense of our textural self, the tones and tensions is just hammered into a particular shape. And we even use that as the term, to get into shape. And
yeah, that's true.
And that shape, like to get into shape, it's whatever the shape is trendy at the time. Whoever sets that trend.
That's great, man. I never really thought of it that way before. It's weird, like, because you have this thing and you don't love it, you're totally divorced from it. It's, if anything, it's just a source of anxiety to you, and you're hoping that if you can get it in the right shape, the anxiety will go away. But all that happens is you get anxious about the shape.
It's compounds, yeah. And you feel yourself less. To pick up on the violence thing, it was the schoolyard came to my mind, where it got to one point where I think there was bullying. It's a boys' school, all boys, Christian public school. There's going to be bullying, poking, to test if you can make it in the world. It's just what boys do.
Yeah.
And I got into a fight one time, and I beat the shit out of someone. And it was so, like, the memory of being if this was a street fight, and beating the shit out of someone, and how it changed how people looked at me, my friends and my neighbors, as in like my peers. And it gave me so much space to breathe that not many other people would have come along and insulted me because I was quick to throw my hands into their face a few times. And then I carried that over to the schoolyard, and it was the same thing. I no longer got bullied because I was the one willing to really quickly, let's call it a short fuse. I would go, before I fight you or I claim you, or I claim you, before any of that, I would just go straight to punch you straight into the face. Or actually headbutt would have been one too. And then that actually set me up for a more stress-free living because I chose violence.
That's really interesting and counterintuitive, and I never had that experience. I mean, once in a blue moon, someone would challenge me to a fight, and I would always back off because I thought the message I got was, "Don't get into fights. Nothing good can come of them. Um, you'll get in trouble. You'll be in even more trouble if you get in one, regardless of the outcome. Like you can't win a fight. Um, A, you probably won't win the fight, and B, even if you win the fight, you lose, right? So, your parents will be getting a call from someone else's parents about how come my son has a, broken nose or whatever. So I never had that cathartic moment that you had, even though later on I try to do it legally. I try to join the boxing club or join the martial arts club, but it always felt like it was so organized that it wasn't truly a fight. It was a game that looked like a fight. So I never really had that catharsis.
Yeah, I don't know if you're missing out on much.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know. Like, I thought it was helpful for me. I just think of it as a time or an event or maybe a realization of a means to get more space.
Yeah,
Right?
I got
I
I got elements of that. I mean, I did from studying martial arts. I did develop confidence, and I did develop a sense of I my odds are better at winning the fight than they were before. So there's a sense of improvement. But I didn't plunge into that primal stream or pool of just pure physical assault. Like there's no laws. We're just in a lawless universe and we can do whatever we want. It's survival of the fittest kind of thing. I never had that.
Now the idea of violence, I have a mixed relationship with.
I'll bet.
I bet most people do. I think there's so much violence in the world right now. It's nauseating to use that term again.
Yeah. Yeah, my anxiety there, back to anxiety, I suppose, is to inadvertently promote violence as a tool to bring about good changes in yourself. Like that's a very honest thing to admit that it can. That I think we have a separate problem where people deny the value of roughhousing and violent rough and tumble play. They're trying to make kids more and more safe, but in the upshot of it is they're turning them into these kind of I've heard them described as emotional hemophiliacs. I think it's a little unfair, but they panic too easily, right? I mean, I think I panic too easily, and I would like to be closer to that reflective, calm presence that I think I could be.
You know that I'm a fan of Miyamoto Musashi, and the quote of his is to the preference to be the warrior in the garden rather than the gardener in the war. And most of my friends, colleagues, partners from martial arts, from jiu-jitsu and from history in Thai boxing, would be the slowest to engage in an altercation in the street because they're educated on violence.
Yeah,
So I think there's a lot to be said for actually educating our youth on violence.
yeah, I agree.
And I don't doubt that a byproduct of it would be calmer and more peaceful adults.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you'll always get a few psychopaths that will just take whatever
Psychopaths.
techniques they learn and just implement it to hurt people more effectively, but they'll probably do that anyway.
Right,
So
except less
it's
efficient.
better to train the sheep how to fight than be worried that the wolves will pick up some techniques.
Yeah, exactly. We're always going to have to deal with whatever I think it's like 3%. Those
Yeah, something.
3%, yeah, 3% of psychopaths. Whatever way they're going to mess up the system, or whatever way they're going to sink the ship. They're going to sink the ship one way or another, like, or at least try to drill holes in it.
So despair. My, I think that there's the Tibetan wheel of life and death, and these six realms that Tibetan Buddhists kind of depict you as being reborn into. And there's a heaven realm, which is the challenge there is that they're all impermanent. People there are so comfortable and so complacent that they kind of forget that it's not going to last. And when the Buddha shows up there, he shows up, he has to be very subtle and he's way off in the distance. And he's just playing the theme of impermanence on like a musical instrument. Just to remind you, like, hey, this isn't going to last. And then there's the anti-god realm, which is down below. The gods are like their downstairs neighbors, and they're full of ambition. They're seething with ambition. You visualize like Trump, right? Uh, they just want to be gods so much, but they can't get there because they're trying too hard, paradoxically. And you go down through the animal realm, where the Buddha shows up like a book because he's teaching the animals to become less brutal or less stupid, to become more subtle minded. And you go down to the hungry ghost realm, which is like all the addicts. They can never get what they need because they become so fixated with this one thing that's actually narrowing and cutting them off from life the more they engage in it. But the bottom realm is the hell realm. It's full of demons, and there's no hope there, and there's no meaning. Everything is just a meaningless, crude, cruel screaming at each other all the time. And that's the worst realm to be in. But according to Buddhist mythology, it's also one of the best because you are super motivated to figure out what's going on and getting out.
Yeah, when you're in hell, keep walking.
Yeah.
All of these realms, do you see them as ways in which you could exist inside this earthly life?
Definitely. I've been to most of them.
Yeah. 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 It's not abstract, ethereal, next
It's a
life.
very accurate picture of not only human society, but you on any given day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can see why people would opt for a life less conscious.
Yeah.
To bury your head in the sand, so to speak, or
It's
to
not even it's not even opt in. You have to opt out, right? You actually have to opt. The default setting is, well, according to Buddhism, because Buddha, it literally means to wake up. You are asleep. So you have to opt out of being asleep. And that's for starters, you have to even notice you're asleep, which is hard
Mhm.
when you're asleep. So there's that first obstacle is just noticing that it's an obstacle at all. And then the next obstacle is dedicating yourself to that project long enough that you actually start to prize off that cloud of dreams and start to see what you really are. That's really challenging.
Really challenging, particularly because let's say you're in the dream state, you're unaware of these seven realms to stick with it. If you become conscious that you're in hell, it's going to burn that a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah, that's the advantage of hell, I suppose. The downside to hell is that the suffering is so intense that it is its own profound distraction. So on the one hand, you could potentially be hyper motivated to figure out an escape plan, but you're also constantly being stymied by all the other demons that are busy ripping each other a new one, you know. Whether they're all in you or they're outside of you kind of doesn't make a difference.
And that makes distraction all that bit more attractive.
Yeah, right. Well, more desperate, right? Because then you're just gonna whatever you're gonna do to get out of the hell realm is gonna be pretty high octane.
Yeah, when you say that, am I hearing you right? It's going to be like when I say distraction, what comes to my mind is either chemically induced or
Yeah.
digitally induced. So if you're saying high octane, are we talking about uh, rounds of pornography or bags on
Yeah,
bags of cocaine?
yeah, I think so. Because the brain, I don't know if the brain really distinguishes between pornography and cocaine, and it's all
Yeah,
just, dopamine. But what you want, I think you're looking for pain relief, and one of the biggest pains that you have when you're despairing is you feel profoundly alone. Like your suffering is unique, like you're uniquely suffering, and no one else can really understand you. And all of these misguided efforts to reach out, like pornography, is like reaching out to a partner, but there's no partner there. So it's like the ugliest trap you can think of. It's like going down in quicksand. You're reaching out for connection to something that tells you this is not only a pleasurable experience, but a meaningful one. And you get confirmed again and again and again that nope, no, actually it wasn't meaningful. It was meaningless, and you're even more alone. That to me, that quicksand quality of hell is fascinating.
And you mentioned this reaching out for connection, because my understanding of connection is that of healing and that of actually, let's say, actualizing or becoming more conscious and becoming more well adjusted to existing. I'm bumbling my words, but I consider, and I think I'm pretty
No,
certain to a
hard to
degree, that
talk about.
connection is is the medicine, is the antidote, is the route from hell.
Yeah, it's just that
And you're saying
first
that
connection.
hell itself waves false carrots for you to
It's
grab onto to
fascinating.
lead you back into hell.
Hell, it really does. It makes one believe that there are entities that have figured out. For instance, in the natural world, there are these parasites, parasitic plants, for instance, that look like uh, the female of a certain species of insect. And so the male insect lands on this thing that looks like a female, and the plant's just using it for pollination purposes to spread its pattern through the world. And so it's a dumber thing taking advantage of a more intelligent thing. Like that's fascinating to me. It never occurred to me before, but that demons could take the form of they could be utterly mindless, like literally mindless, like algorithms, and you alight on them like some stupid insect, and they use you to suck you dry.
That's disgusting. It reminds me, you use the term algorithm, and I'm thinking about these social media fucking things on a phone.
Yeah.
And if you stay there long enough, this algorithm is this parasite that wants to lure you deeper into hell. You stay there long enough, and it's constantly like going, hey, what about a little bit of this? You want some of this? Let me figure out what it is. What's the thing I'm going to get? I'm watching your eyes. And what do your eyes go to? And
Mm.
for how long? Oh, you want a bit of this? This is your thing. Come on over here. I got some. He like flips open his coat. You want some of this, buddy? Come down, follow me down this lane, man. Have a little look. I got more. I got more. And
And
they're
it's kind
just
of like
looking to steal your time and attention. Like,
I remember when I was a kid and I was watching a movie and a guy was in a desert and a mirage occurred and I didn't understand what was going on. And my dad told me, oh, mirages are like tricks of the light. There's some combination of an optical illusion mixed with wishful thinking, and you end up thinking that you're going to get sustenance, but you're not. And then you're devastated even more than you were when you just thought you were lost in the desert because you actually thought you were getting to water and now you're really, really not. So it's a particularly vicious error to make. And the uh, the desert of the real that we live in is made doubly painful, I think, by this thing that it's not even trying. I feel like it's occasionally it's malevolent, but what's creepy to me is that it's not even trying to be malevolent. It's just trying to use you by giving you what you want. But the upshot of it is that it is indistinguishable from a malevolent thing that was out to hurt you.
yeah, right. Because you can program it to a degree to satisfy your needs if your needs are orientated such that it moves you in an opposite direction rather than, let's say,
Yeah,
sex and violence. And you
yeah,
have
it's
an
just what
interest
it's
in something
optimized
else.
for. It's like at the moment, what it's optimized for is to give you what your untutored, completely screwed up mind wants. Whereas what it needs to be optimized for is what like a Buddha or a Christ would be trying to steer you towards.
What do you think that would be?
I have no idea, but I think the paths out of despair are many. And I suspect that if more people knew that they were closer to getting away from this hell than they realize. That in itself would be enough hope to maybe get them out.
Isn't that the difference between like deep sorrow and depression? Depression is this hopeless state in that you can't see a future in which you can get out of this state.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that, okay, if we allow that there's a difference between sorrow and depression, because one way of splicing that could be depression is our brain word for it, and sorrow is our inside the experience word for it,
Mm.
right? But
Mm.
if there is a difference between sorrow and depression, then it's a little bit like the difference between joy and happiness, right? Joy is not about feeling pleasure, like uh, good. It's about, it's a kind of euphoria that says the world is so much bigger than you realized it was, and it's full of surprises. That's very different, I think, from happiness, which is just like more steady state, like everything's good, I'm cool. And the same thing with sorrow. Sorrow has the potential, I think, to do the same thing as joy, to blow up the world. So it goes, it's bigger and richer than you thought it was. Whereas depression is this steady state desert, right? That you're just in all the time.
Mm. Yeah, these are terms we use. That's a great way of describing joy. It's expansive, hopeful.
Yeah, and shocking. I think joy is always kind of shocking.
Yeah, there's an awe quality to it. In that sense, so if we're talking about a path from hell, we couldn't ignore uh, some type of seeking of joy. Again, that's a Ridley question because that can get tricky too, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, you're
What
right.
defining joy or what brings joy?
I think that's the problem that you, I think why C.S. Lewis's autobiography is called Surprised by Joy is because he said you always have to be surprised by joy. Joy is not something you can control for in the way that you can set up the conditions so you end up living a happier life. You can kind of control for happiness somewhat, but you really can't set up the conditions for joy because by definition it's surprising. It kind of ambushes you. And so you can't plan for it. But I think what you can do is you can set up the conditions such that you're open to it happening, so that the likelihood of it happening, they keep increasing. You seem to get luckier all the time when you're properly oriented to the world, which is to say, less paranoid, more on the metanoia path.
That's really good because it's. I suppose we have a bit of a responsibility to close out our conversation by bringing up setting yourself up for joy, so to speak. To, if I'm hearing you correctly, at least setting up the situation which it could um, show its face or increasing the likelihood of joy showing up. And I can't escape how awe and joy are related in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another episode. What
Yeah,
I
maybe
would
so.
suggest,
Maybe we talk about awe.
there's a physical aspect to this, like I found with my psoas muscle. Uh, there's a physical aspect to this. You can set yourself up by figuring out what's malfunctioning and staring it square in the eye and adjusting and addressing it, as they might, for instance, in your clinic. But then there's the psycho-emotional aspect to it too, which is instead of lurching, reaching for joy, you can try and figure out why you're constantly moving, why you're constantly trying, why you're constantly clenching. Like if you create, I was watching a documentary about the Sabbath, but it's the idea of a holy day where you stop doing everything and you sit in being and you just notice that it exists and that it is. When you stop messing around with it and demanding things of it, good. That is at least a kind of wiping the slate clean so that you're sane enough to have some kind of human rather than some animal response.
Last conversation with you, you told me that you still fully don't understand my practice of standing still. And after what you just said there, surely it is some bit more understandable.
I understand the stillness part, it's just the standing part to me. And again, just thinking
Okay.
about it right now, standing still for a long period of time makes me, just thinking about it now, not even doing it, just thinking about it makes me nervous.
Well, then don't do it in standing. I don't know if you have like a lying or a sitting stillness practice.
I like lying down and I love walking.
Yeah, yeah. Would you call that stillness?
Yes, I would. It's still in all the important ways.
Lovely. So can we agree so that if we're going to set up a parameter to where joy can occur. It's somewhere, it's in a stillness setting.
Yeah, I think it's something to do with the way you're moving or the way you're being still. Because I could easily imagine someone who is tied up in knots, trying to become still and panicking.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, completely understand that. When I moved to the coast, I felt an obligation to not neglect the proximity I had with the sea.
Yeah.
But I had an issue with the cold. After all, it's the Irish Sea. It's damn cold.
It's not the Riviera.
Right? So I wanted to get into the sea because, again, like I said, it feels so obvious that it's a good idea. All this cold, all this cold talk, all this swimming talk, it's in nature. It gave me time to myself, all the good stuff. Theoretically, it was like, this is a damn good idea. I'd like this in my life. But I think I was shook, I was anxious, and the cold water hitting my skin is like, I don't know, man. This isn't the easiest thing
There's no
around.
way out of it. It's a
So
stressor.
I don't know if this is, I don't know. I'm going to put a caveat on this. This is not advice. This is what I did.
Okay.
I smoked some marijuana just because it settled me to a degree in which when I walked into the water, rather than my old style of run, get under the water and go as fast as you can until you get your body temperature up to a certain amount that you can tolerate being in there, or you can clench long enough to get what could be considered a sufficient amount of time so I can give myself the pat on the back and say, I did it.
Yeah.
And when I got in and the cold was meeting me, it reminded me of a time when I was learning to surf and the waves were just knocking me off my board, and I'd get back on the board and it would knock me off the board, and I would just try and duck dive and it would blow me off my board, and a part of me wanted just to shout at the wave and go, God damn it, give me a minute. And I kind of laughed at myself and going, you fucking idiot. The water, the waves, is not going to listen to you. It's you have to change here. So when I was in the water this time and I was in some bit calmer so that I could think, and my body was beginning to clench and I was looking at the sea, I remember you. I can't ask of you to change to make me more comfortable. I must adapt to you. And within that moment, I let go of my, whatever it was, my tension is what I let go of. And I accepted the cold. I accepted the water. And it was bliss. It was bliss immediately. Bliss. I was like, I kind of giggled to myself. I laughed. I was like, I was trying to force this.
Yeah.
When it was such an opposite, I should have accepted it. No, it didn't take many other sessions. I think from a somatic point of view, I had put a breadcrumb trail into a state of being that I need to get into so as to enjoy this without the assistance of marijuana.
Yeah. Right. They were the training wheels.
Exactly. I wanted to get in, but I needed some help to buffer. I needed to learn. Then,
to be open to the cold, as you're describing, is to finally be open to the world. And like that, it really is the opposite of paranoia.
which I think is a similar skill set to the practice of stillness.
It's more dynamic though, right? That stillness is your ability to be okay with the quiet, with the silence. That might terrify some people. And there are some people out there that might be able to do this cold water thing no problem because it's so dramatic. Like it's firing up it's stimulating their nervous system, and that feels okay to them because that's kind of what they want. Whereas for other people, they might take the stillness perfectly well, but you ask them to get in and do something challenging in a challenging environment, and that's their real sticking point, you know.
In a challenging environment, as in something that's challenging, like the cold, or
Yeah,
something
the
that's
goals.
overcoming adversity, like a
Something
physical
from
adversity.
outside of them. Something outside of them is confronting them there. they're very, very exercised by it, you know, so they try to hide. But like you say, they grit their teeth. Like they do it, like they get through it, but it's an agenda item and they take it off. They never actually open to the experience. So the only thing they learn from it is I can clench up and endure.
Right. As opposed, if you were to create the opposite of that, what would you say that? How would you describe that?
I think it would be something like I and the sea are one. Not to be too
Yeah, 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 yeah.
poetic about it, but like the sea and I are creating this experience together. That's what's real.
And now that you say that, I'll share more in that I did feel connected. I opened up to the sea in this case, and I familiarized myself with her. I recognize the sea as a feminine quality. And now when I go to the water, of course, I don't need any substance to assist. I approach gleefully, and I literally, I say aloud, hello, do you mind if I come in? I'm so like, I have I'm happy to be there, so to speak. I'm happy to open up and to go straight to the whole connection. Like I don't run, dive, and splash, splash. I walk in slowly as if I were to enter a church, for example. I wouldn't run into a church.
It also sounds like being a good, not to, you know, this might be a bit forcing the issue, but it sounds like being a good lover, you know, like you're being respectful and it's consensual and you don't like barge in, but like you just go, this is going to be intense, but it's going to be welcoming and welcoming intensity.
Yeah. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Welcoming intensity.
Yeah, that's the key out of paradigm is to welcome intensity.
Beautiful. All right, man.
Till next time.
Take care.